get my...
Oh, we're live.
I'm getting my microphone.
Sorry, I went live before Mary Lou was quite ready. Hi,
I'm never
everyone.
quite ready. Hi.
I've been having internet problems today, just as I was last week, actually. But so if people are watching in the live stream, can you let me know if either myself or Mary Lou are like freezing up or if our audio is janky or anything? I'm really hoping everything is going to be fine. But I have been, my neighborhood here in Mexico has been having internet cable issues, and those things are not resolved very quickly or efficiently here. So I'm really sorry if the stream is janky, but I'm really hoping it goes okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the stream. This is Where Are All the Women? And not all the women are here. I'm here. I'm here with Mary Lou Singleton, and Genevieve was here, but I believe she might be having some internet/connectivity issues because she was here and now she's disappeared, and I'm hoping that she will come back. I wasn't sure if the issues were on my end or her end, but it seems like it may have been a problem with her internet on her end, which is unfortunate because she has a lot of great things to say about this subject that we're going to be talking about today, which is, of course, chest feeding. Oh, I see Genevieve in the corner here, so let's add her again and see if this works. Hi.
Hey, is that better?
So much better from mine.
Okay. If you for those who are watching in the live chat, please let us know how this is looking on your end. On my end, it's sort of okay, but it's a little bit freezy, but I suspect that that's just my connection over here. And I'm hoping that on the viewer end on YouTube and on Twitter, if you're watching on Twitter, things are looking good. Lord, infrastructure problems can be stressful, but I do get a lot of extra vitamin D, so I feel like it's a good trade-off. And freedom. I have freedom, but not always reliable internet. Megan says we all look blurry. Crap. Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like if the audio is working, then okay. Helena says, it looks fine and I can hear you. Pretty good here from Catherine. Okay. I'm going to go with we're okay. Thank you, everyone, for letting us know. Genevieve Gluck is a treasure. That is absolutely correct. Okay. So Mary Lou Singleton, for anyone who is new to these streams, is a herbalist and a nurse practitioner and a witchy woman. And we actually just did this, in my opinion, amazing herbalism workshop over in Sayulita. And I'm like so excited and so inspired. I've started putting all sorts of things in jars, but I'm doing it all wrong. But you know, like I think these errors are like a learning. I was like, I'll just put a bunch of herbs and like some lemons and some apple cider vinegar and then also maybe some coconut oil, and I'll let it sit out in the sun in a jar and see what happens. And I also discovered that this like medicinal flower that Mary Lou taught us about over the weekend called, is it the bougainvillea? Is that right?
Bougainvillea. Mm-hmm.
The bougainvillea is this beautiful pink flower, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere, and I guess I never really noticed before. There's beautiful flowers all over the place in Sayulita, so I just am like, oh, this is beautiful, but I never paid attention, and they're everywhere, like around my gym. So I was working out, and it was like, oh, there's this whole giant bougainvillea tree, and then surrounding my whole gym in the back. So I'm gonna bring a jar tomorrow and collect all these flowers and make a beautiful pink cough syrup, and I'll fill you in on the progress of that, everyone. So that's Mary Lou's story. Her website I've linked to down below on YouTube. It's enchantedfamilymedicine.com, and she's also on Substack at Mary Lou Singleton. Genevieve Gluck is a writer for Reduxx, which is this incredible platform covering trans perversion. I'm not sure if that's how Reduxx describes itself. Maybe you can elaborate on that, Genevieve.
I mean, that's a good way of putting it, but yeah, we describe it as focusing on safeguarding, so the rights of women and children and safeguarding as it relates to gender identity specifically. So yes, trans perversion is a little bit accurate, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate truth, I mean, the stuff that you guys cover over there is like so dark, and
Mhm.
I feel bad that this is what you all have to, deep dive through all this like horrific, I mean, more than just perversion, but, like pedophilia and all sorts of sexual abuse and sexual assault stuff, and just violence against women and kids. And but I mean, I don't know that anybody was really doing that before Reduxx came along, certainly not in this capacity. So it's really important work that you all are doing over there. Thank you. And thank you to Anna, of course, the founder. So, and again, I've linked to Genevieve's socials down in the show notes on YouTube. So I think this new I don't want to say trend, this new claim that men can breastfeed has blown up a bit in terms of the public debate. And I think, as far as I can tell, this happened because there was a response letter from the University of Sussex NHS that was leaked, and they were responding to a letter from a group called Children of Transitioners. And this group was essentially asking the NHS about what they had called their perinatal care policy for trans and non-binary people, which was published in 2021. And they expressed safeguarding concerns about the sexual and emotional abuse of babies and children. And we're asking about this advice that was talking about, breastfeeding, using terms like human milk, and lactating and non-lactating parent, and of course chest feeding. It's turned breastfeeding into a gender neutral thing, which is obviously very strange because men can't breastfeed babies and they can't produce milk for babies. But as I was reading the letter response from somebody named Dr. Rachel James, who was at the time, this letter was published in August 2023. But I think maybe it was leaked more recently. She's the medical director of the NHS Trust. And what she did was she wrote this whole response letter responding to the concerns expressed by the children of transitioners without even acknowledging that women and men are different. So again, she's using the term human milk throughout, and she explains that she's using this term because it's neutral and not gender biased. And uses, she never responds to women. She never specifically says women or men or female or male or anything like that. And so it's really confusing because mostly what she's doing is she's responding to concerns as though we're talking about women and how women lactate and how you can induce lactation in women. But she's including so-called trans women in that because trans women are women, but doesn't even say that. Doesn't even say, I'm also talking about trans women. Of course, she would never say I'm talking about men who identify as women or men who transition or whatever. So it's really weird. But she behaves as though there's no problem at all with so-called, supposedly inducing lactation, and that, there's no difference between a mother breastfeeding her baby and somebody else, either parent breastfeeding a baby. And there was this woman who was on BBC, and this was a weird video too, responding to this whole controversy. And she was saying, let me find her name, Kate Luxian. And she was saying, this isn't a new conversation. There's studies from back in the 90s that talk about the sameness, these are her words, the sameness of milk from the birth mother and the co-lactating mother. There's no difference. There's no difference between this milk. So it's just like, I cannot believe that anyone who was a doctor or anyone who, claimed to be concerned about the safeguarding and health of babies, would go along with any of this. But I suppose we can start with a response. I mean, Mary Lou, how are you responding to all of this?
With horror. But I do want to point out, this isn't new, that this is something that we saw on the horizon, like back in 2014, 2015, with what was happening with changing the language of midwifery and changing the language around women's health care. And these terms, chest feeding, for women who say they're men who are now breastfeeding, we have to say chest feeding. But we were told that if trans women are inducing lactation, then it's breastfeeding. And in 2017, The Stranger ran an article in the queer issue that year. The Stranger is a weekly in Seattle. The editor is Dan Savage, who is a gay man who's been kind of at the forefront of pushing a lot of what gets called sex positive, like hypersexuality, no boundaries, polyamory, all of that. He's been really at the cutting edge of that since the early 2000s, and he's the editor of The Stranger. And in his queer issue in 2017, there was a whole article of an AGP breastfeeding my daughter for the first time, where this man admitted that he, quote, got off on it, unquote. So it was being normalized, that was 7 years ago. And now we're just at the place where here it is, all of the fruits of the last 10 years of obfuscation around language, pushing this trans women are women narrative, pushing the anyone can breastfeed narrative. Here we are where the NHS is coming out with I thought it was a formal statement, but you're saying it was a response to a letter. I thought they made a formal statement saying that breast milk from trans women is as good or even possibly better as from women.
This was a letter from the NHS that was responding to these concerns. I think that there was also a CDC statement. There may have been more than one thing. I was just reading about all these letters and then responses, and then reading some of the links that Dr. Rachel James used as evidence to support her claims, which included a link from La Leche League. Unfortunately, this was from 2020, Breastfeeding Without Giving Birth. And they use the terms gestational parent and non-gestational parent. And the non-gestational parent refers to adoptive parents, intended parents through surrogacy, parents whose partner is birthing, and trans women. And they say because parents who haven't given birth do not have the hormones of pregnancy to get their bodies started with making milk, they need more information and support to make breastfeeding a reality. And it goes on to say, human milk feeding, this human milk term is so creepy to me. Human milk feeding can be simulated with a nursing supplementer, a bag or bottle that holds human milk or formula carried to the nipple via a tiny feeding tube. Parents who are not making any milk may also choose to feed with a bottle while their baby comforts and connects with them by suckling at the dry breast. And then they talk about milk produced by inducing lactation. And this part is a bit confusing to me, and you can probably explain more about this, Mary Lou, but they say it's comparable to that produced following birth. The milk does not contain dangerous levels of artificial hormones. In fact, it very rarely contains any artificial hormones at all. In most cases, the only artificial hormones that are taken are estrogen and or progesterone. Before there is milk production, progesterone and estrogen levels are high during pregnancy, and taking these hormones artificially may help to make the body think it's pregnant. So this is, again, in reference to the concerns expressed by, so Dr. James is referencing this information to essentially comfort people into believing that if a man is lactating, that's not harmful in any way. It's totally safe because, you know, women who've induced lactation in this particular way by taking these hormones, that milk is supposedly safe for babies. I don't know if it is or not in terms of women, but it's still not the same thing if a man is lactating.
Sorry, can I just jump in there for a
Yeah.
second? Because as you were reading that, you know, I kind of like raised my hand for a second because I was like, I heard the word gestational carrier, but then, you know, you explained like, obviously that's a reference to surrogacy. And we keep seeing that overlap between the artificial reproductive technology industry and with the trans movement. You know, they're so intertwined, they're so interconnected. And that word gestational carrier, back in, I want to say 2019, when I had written that article that was about Senator Brad Hoylman in New York, when he legalized surrogacy in the state of New York, he also had submitted a bill that hasn't passed yet, but it's a bill to establish a breast milk industry, which, well, I mean, it's horrific, but it makes sense if you're buying babies through surrogacy, and especially if you're a man or a gay couple, you don't have any natural milk, right? So you have to then set up a breast milk industry. And so I feel like within the gender neutral, it's really sex neutral language, it's preparing us all for this, how should I say, like the takeover of reproduction in a lot of ways. But Mary Lou, you probably know a lot about the actual impact of breast milk with its relation to health of the infant as compared to whatever the hell the men are producing. So
I feel like this topic that we're discussing is the crucible of so many of the critical issues that we're talking about, you know, like you said, transhumanism, the separation of reproduction from women's bodies and from human sexuality, selling the body, all of that. So I don't even know where to start. And then the autogynephilia and pedophilia, all of these things. It's hard to know where to start with this issue. But first, I do want to address what you said and say there already is an enormous human breast milk industry that has already been established, and it was being established in the 2010s with human milk banks popping up all over the place. The Clinton Foundation in the 2010s was setting up, milking factories for women in South America and in the Philippines, where poor and working class women who are mothers, these are mothers, are going to hook themselves up to milking machines and sell their milk. Like this has been going on a long time. I know of cases of, I got contacted by a family in Appalachia, poor family, where a woman was saying, you know, my daughter's been selling her milk and now she has terrible mastitis. She sells over a quart a day and doesn't want to stop. It's paying their bills right now. What can we do so she can keep producing, but not have this terrible infection that's going on? Like this is already reality. This is here. And, you know, we have to sit with that of just the commodification of human breast milk, of course, is, you know, goes right along with the commodification of our eggs and the commodification of our wombs and the commodification of our vaginas, and now the commodification of our infants. And milk is just another one. So it's already happening. What I would say is back it up of, you know, I'm tired of the science. I am tired of the reductionism. Breastfeeding is part of what should be an uninterrupted continuum of the beginning of pregnancy, gestation, the seamless entry into motherhood and individuality of the baby, holding your baby in your arms with the cord still pulsing where you're 2 but 1, and then the baby goes to the breast, and that relationship continues, that continuum connection between the new human being and the mother. Like, we all come from a place where we were one with someone, then we gradually became 2. We didn't become 2 at birth. We gradually separated from our mother through a weaning process, and breastfeeding is part of that. And the benefits of breastfeeding can't be reduced to antibodies and nutrition and essential fatty acids and prebiotics, all these words I see when people are explaining why breast milk is so important. It's about human connection and healthy sensuality and healthy attachment and love and comfort, things that can't be quantified.
Mm.
And every time breast milk is being sold, or children are being sold, or someone who is not the woman who gave birth to that child is breastfeeding a child, a horrible injury has occurred. And that's not being acknowledged. Like, the benefits of breastfeeding are way beyond anything science can tell us.
And Mary Lou, doesn't the mother's body respond to changes with the infant over time? So, like, doesn't the breast milk kind of accommodate changes to the infant as well?
Absolutely. If the baby is sick, the mother instantly starts making antibodies to treat whatever illness her body is picking up from that baby, because they're breastfeeding women we lost breastfeeding for a while, where most people in the United States, were not breastfed. My generation, over 90% of us were not breastfed. Our mothers were told breast milk is bad for babies. Formula is scientific. The word formula was, there were think tanks and groups that sat around and thought, like, what's a word that will make people buy this, that it's good in science? Oh, formula. You're feeding a baby formula. That's better than, I'm so sorry, whatever, like unregulated junk might be coming out of your breasts, right? Like, it's science. Our mothers were given shots to dry up.
This
their
milk
milks.
hasn't been tested.
No, exactly.
Yeah, it's not been approved by the experts.
Then we got breastfeeding back somewhat with La Leche League and this huge grassroots movement to reclaim breastfeeding. And this was this women's movement that was non-hierarchical and not commodified. La Leche was free. It was decentralized. It was this similar to AA, like no one owned La Leche, it belonged to all women. It was this very radical organization that really brought breastfeeding back. And then suddenly we had to have all these studies about why, and we had to start scientizing breastfeeding, and we had to prove that it really was okay for us to breastfeed our children. We weren't really hurting them to breastfeed them, as our mothers had been told. It really was good for them. So we produced all this evidence to say how good it was, so I'm kind of going off on that, but you're right. Out of that evidence that was produced by feminists and breastfeeding activists, we found out that a woman who has twins will make different milk for the different babies, and not from each breast. Like, one breast doesn't make baby A's milk and one breast doesn't make baby B's milk. When baby A is nursing, her milk is different than her brother's milk, because the mother's body knows on some completely unconscious, ineffable level what that baby needs. Mothers of preemies make different milk than mothers of term babies. Mothers of boys make different milk than mothers of girls. Like, women make specific milk for our babies in this ancient, beautiful, magical way that can't ever be replicated by anybody else. So obviously, like, if you're buying pasteurized milk from the human milk bank, none of that magic is in it. None of that specialized medicine for one particular baby is in that. It's just a commodity that's hot and more valuable than formula right now.
What's happening when lactation is being induced? Let's just talk about women for now, but say in a woman who was, who bought a baby from a surrogate, for example.
If lactation is induced in her, so a woman who's been pregnant through the first trimester, her breasts have changed to have glandular tissue that can produce milk. Like that happens in the first 12 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. So any woman who's had a late miscarriage or abortion, like after, well, not late, but a miscarriage or abortion after 11 to 13 weeks can theoretically produce milk with enough stimulation of the breasts. And women who haven't been pregnant can produce usually some milk with just a lot of nipple stimulation, but often it doesn't work with them. So when a woman buys a baby, a lot of them then buy milk from the surrogate. The surrogates then sell their milk. It's another level of money making. If you look at the surrogacy contracts, it's like you can make this much for this and this much for this. And then if you're willing to sell your milk for 3 months, it'll be this much more. So a lot of them are feeding the baby the surrogate's milk. A lot of them are getting milk from milk banks. Some of these women are wanting to purchase the full experience. And, they're there in the delivery room. They get in their own hospital bed. I saw one picture recently that was so disgusting of the mother who has just given birth. The placenta is still intact. The cord is going into her vagina and the baby still attached. That cord is in the arms of the buyer and the buyer's just beaming. And so she's getting the buyer's getting that experience. She wants, that authentic experience. So that woman probably will want to put that baby to her breast, and she'll probably get what's called a supplemental nursing system that you were talking about, Megan, where she'll put the donor milk in a little bottle or bag that hangs between her breasts. And there's a little tiny tube that gets attached to the nipple, and she'll put the baby on there to simulate breastfeeding. And maybe she'll be able to make some milk. And that milk will have some nutrition to it, but it's not like that baby is still, I don't think we should celebrate that in any way. I'm not sure how that's better than formula. This is about the ego gratification of someone who just purchased a human being and used another woman as an incubator.
Yeah, and on an industrial scale, it just strikes me that what we're doing is experimenting on probably the most vulnerable people, an infant, and we're just saying, okay, we're going to medically experiment on you, just to see if we can create these ART industries. It's horrible.
Right. And we've gotten the population so disconnected from ourselves through almost a century of, 3/4 of a century of industrialized birth, where hospitals deliver babies. Babies are a product that the hospital delivers. People describe entering motherhood as when I brought you home from the hospital. Like that was all necessary to warp our minds this way to start with, right? And then the industrialization of birth is necessary for any of this industrial stuff to happen in human reproduction. And then ripping us off with breastfeeding, getting rid of breastfeeding, bringing breastfeeding back, but making it like a medical thing. The Affordable Care Act introducing everyone gets a free breast pump. If you birth in the hospital, you get a free breast pump because we're so breastfeeding friendly, and teaching women that hooking themselves up to an industrial contraption is somehow breastfeeding, celebrating breast pumps. I see so many women and feminists celebrating breast pumps like it's some feminist coup that we have to be our own wet nurse now, right? Like it's, you can go back to work at 6 weeks, but you can still breastfeed if you hook yourself up to this industrial machine, and now you're your own wet nurse and a working woman and you really have it all. So all that mind fucking has already happened. Like we're just all so disconnected and have normalized all these crazy things that now people can't see how nuts this new twist is. And then on top of it all, the obfuscation of language and the societal neutron bomb of transgenderism that's just, softened everyone's mind. People can't see what's going on.
Well, yeah, and I think what Genevieve said earlier about the end game, someone in the comments said something similar. I think Forgo on Books in the live chat, just said, I guess the game is to separate us from everything we are and need to be, then repackage it, patent it, and corner us until we have to buy it so someone can get beyond too rich. And I think what Genevieve was saying earlier about it sort of separating us from our bodies, and I think more generally just treating us not as holistic beings, as a series of parts. You can take one out, you can add one, you can make person whatever they want to be. Your brain is separate from your body, and your body does not work as a whole. So of course you can implant a uterus into a man, for example, and then he can get pregnant and give birth as well. And it does seem like a very potentially profitable industry. We're already seeing that surrogacy is like a massive, super, super profitable industry. Transgenderism in general also seems like a very profitable industry when you're creating patients for life who are dependent on hormones and all sorts of other drugs for their entire lives and have to get all these very complicated ongoing surgeries. So let's talk about this idea of men. Like, I don't even want to say it out loud. It's so disgusting. Like, men breastfeeding babies, and this claim that you can't say breastfeeding because the men don't have breasts, but
they
the
get
idea
to say
that
breastfeeding, yeah. Like they call it breastfeeding, but the women who don't want to be women call it chest feeding.
Right. Interesting.
I saw a similar thing with promotional material for a surrogacy clinic that was in their LGBT section, where it talked about trans women donating their sperm. And so in the flyer, it called the men women, and it called the women gestational carriers.
So they get to have women and we don't get to have it at all. It's not even that we're all women. It's that we're like a gender neutral human, and men get to actually be women. Cool.
Well, I have a question for Genevieve of what are your thoughts on the fact that we have this Gen Specs phenomenon where there's this normalization of AGPs, and we're finally talking about autogynephilia, and then there's this big thing with what's his name, Debbie Hayton, coming out with his book about admitting he's an autogynephile. He gets off on pretending he's a woman. He gets off on living as a woman in the female experience, and all of that's coming out. The women who are holding the line on language are all suddenly a bunch of men we thought were our allies are saying, why can't you be nice to Debbie Hayton and call this man she? And we finally have some light being shed culturally on autogynephilia, and then this pops up right away. What's your thought on that?
It's the same thing with that. Sorry to interrupt. This will be brief, but that Julia Millot character who I got screamed at for days on the internet. And in fact, somebody at the event that I did it in Toronto about free speech, just following that, which was connected to the group of people that I got screamed at by, this woman came up to me in the break and just berated me. And I had to like tell her, okay, that's enough. I was like, ask the question in the Q&A period and we'll talk about it. But like, these people are all waiting to say hi to me, and you're just like yelling at me about being mean to this Julia Millot character who's an AGP and calls himself a mother and is interested in breastfeeding the baby, and like, you know, who's trying to center himself, as men do, as this like rational critic of gender identity. You can't trust these radical feminists and these crazy women who are so emotional. Like, listen to me, I'm a trans, so I can be rational on this. And then we have all these people who are new to the debate being like, you should listen to Julia. She's actually very intelligent and has a lot of important things to add to this conversation, which of course he doesn't. He has nothing interesting to add to this conversation. He's sort of vaguely critical of teaching gender identity ideologies to kids in school, but the rest of it is all good. Anyway, let's get back to Genevieve and your answer to Mary Lou's question.
Well, you know, I am pretty busy, so I've been trying to stay out of the ongoing conversation about that, but I have been watching it because, you know, the very first thing that jumps out at me about it is, so there are these men who say that they're trans women, but then they say, but I know I'm a man, right? And then that is supposed to be the statement that gets people to trust them. Oh, you're rational. Like, you get it. You know that you're a man. And then what do? Well, he said he knows he's a man, so let's call him a woman. What? What?
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, well then you can be a woman.
And people seem to, now I probably shouldn't say this, but it seems to me that sometimes people forget that these are master manipulators. They have practiced and practiced. So that should always be in the back of our mind, right? That these men are skilled at lying. They lie as they breathe because they're telling you that there's something they're not every day. So when it comes to the whole Gen Spect thing, that's sort of my opinion about it. Is I don't really feel like we need to be platforming men with fetishes and applauding them for saying that they have them. I think that a possible solution would be maybe a women-only, women-run organization to deal with some of these issues. My response to things tends to be, we just need more women-only stuff all over, generally. But yeah, you were going to say something, Megan.
I mean, well, yeah, I just wanted to interject and then we can move on from this conversation because I know that's not the topic at hand. And I didn't follow that controversy closely at all either. I saw it happening on Twitter, but I didn't really get involved and I didn't see what was being criticized. I didn't read Janice Turner's article. I didn't watch Andrew Doyle's segment. I have a lot of respect for both of those people. I think Janice Turner is awesome and she does really important journalism. I really like Andrew Doyle. He's great on this and many other issues. And so, you know, I'm not a fan of people going after them online, but, you know, I didn't follow it closely enough to say either way. I did listen to Julie Bendel interviewed Hayton on her podcast, and she did a really good job. I highly recommend listening to that interview. She was quite challenging of him and did not go easy on him and obviously didn't agree with him on everything that he was saying. But yeah, and I guess that is to say I don't have necessarily a problem with platforming these people if it's in the form of journalism or interviewing, because I think that's the point of journalism and interviewing people is to learn and to hear from people. And sometimes they dig themselves into a hole and sometimes you'll learn something that you didn't expect to. And so I think that's worthwhile. But I think lauding these men and holding them up as having some kind of specific form of, you know, a particularly rational view on this thing, or that they're somehow worth listening to more than other people, more than women who are critical because they somehow understand transgenderism better than other people. I don't know. I mean, I don't usually find these guys particularly interesting. If there was one that was particularly interesting and had something particularly interesting to say, then sure, fine, I might want to hear from him. But just the fact that this is a person who identifies as a trans woman or a transsexual, but also knows that they're male, that isn't in and of itself particularly interesting to me.
Can I just say something, which is that there is this implicit suggestion that women have a bias about this. Yeah. And not just particular women, but all women who talk about this have an implicit bias, right? And they look towards men with these paraphilias as sort of the neutral source, which is like just absolutely mind-blowing to me. You know, you wouldn't ask well, I shouldn't make comparisons. Maybe I feel like I'll get in a lot of trouble if I start making comparisons. But the person who is having this condition or problem should not be seen as the authority on it. And I think we ought to be listening to the trans widows. So the women who have been in these relationships with these men firsthand should probably be treated with a little more of the authority that they deserve instead of being dismissed as having a bias.
Well, I also think we should be listening to these autogynephiles when they tell us this is a kink. They are sexually excited by pretending to be a woman, and now they want to breastfeed, which means it should be illegal for them to do so. It should be illegal for them to create material promoting it. It should be illegal for them to honestly probably be near infants, in my opinion. And I say that as, I don't know how to create that, but they definitely, this is pedophilia. They are using a newborn, an infant as a sexual prop. Like they are sexually abusing a child by pretending to breastfeed. By breastfeeding, they have told us who they are. They have repeatedly said it's a sexual kink. The Stranger publishes an article in 2017, and the man says he got off on breastfeeding the infant, and still we're considered irrational and crazy and overly emotional if we point out that these men are telling us that their intent is to sexually abuse infants.
Yeah, I want to say something about that because I discovered recently that within looking at some of the writing in online pro-pedophile forums, it dawned on me that pedophiles hate mothers.
Mm-hmm.
Truly. There's an envy there of the mother-child bond, which makes perfect sense, right? I mean, in a terrible way, but that they want to have that connection with children. They see breastfeeding as somehow sexual themselves, and they intensely dislike women, but especially mothers. And I wanted to mention, too, an article I just wrote for Reduxx a few days ago about a man in Canada. Maybe you guys saw this, but he is HIV positive and is breastfeeding, chest feeding, whatever. He's trying to.
Yeah, he's putting a newborn to his nipple. Okay.
Right.
He's HIV positive. I did see that, and then I didn't have a chance to read the article, so maybe you can talk more about that situation and who this guy is. Is he in like a gay relationship, or how does he have access to a baby?
He is in a relationship with a woman who birthed the baby, and in a pattern that we keep seeing, he decided that he was really a woman, or he decided to go public with his fetish as she was pregnant. So
what a literal narcissist. Sorry, but it's like, you're pregnant. I have a big announcement to make.
Yeah, so this story is a little complicated. So let me just explain some of the details. So first of all, he used to be an MRA. So he was supporting A Voice for Men, the American MRA group. It seems to me like he sort of had a midlife crisis around his late 40s. Then he's 52 now, by the way, but on social media, he says, he's 52 going on 33, which is another thing that I've seen with these paraphiliacs, this one in particular of wanting to be a woman, is that they have this fetish for age regression, which is highly disturbing and to me indicative of pedophilia. And he's being supported, he says, by a Goldfarb clinic in Quebec, in Montreal. So the photo that he posted to Reddit a few months ago that has been doing the rounds is him holding the infant outside of the Goldfarb clinic. And he has admitted that he knows that HIV could be transmitted this way. And so because of that, he's doing regular checkups, he says, which is just the height of, like, it's as though we are inventing new ways to sexually abuse children.
So what is this guy's name?
Murray Pearson. He uses the name Margie Fancy Pants online, but his real name is Murray Pearson.
So he didn't buy a baby. His wife gave birth. Okay, so we have to say too, anytime a man is doing this, a mother and child are being robbed of their formative innate right to this connection, right? Like, this is a mother and child are being robbed of a breastfeeding relationship. So this guy is stealing this from his wife and stealing it from his infant. And he has HIV, which means he's either taking very toxic drugs that an infant shouldn't be exposed to, or he's not, and he could pass the virus on to his child.
Exactly. And, what about just taking the progesterone? Oh, I forgot another gross aspect of this story is that he brags about, I don't even want to say it. He takes the progesterone rectally.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So how do we know why he's HIV positive by any chance?
He's said so. And we also contacted a medical professional that he claimed to have a working relationship with. She sent us a statement. She said that, I mean, it's confirmed, so it's all in the article, but
there's a big push to normalize HIV. I know that a few years before the COVID insanity hit, the state of California decriminalized not disclosing that you have HIV and like willingly exposing other people to HIV, which is so insane within what they did with COVID, where it was like illegal to sneeze in the grocery store because you might give someone COVID. Like it just,
Yeah.
you know, it's like not illegal to intentionally infect somebody. There's so much money in creating like the manageable chronic illness of HIV. There's a lot of money in more and more people having HIV. It's so insane. And there's a lot of like HIV positive pride movement. You know, it's not supposed to be considered something to be upset about.
Well, HIV, like transgenderism, right? You're a patient for life, right? So
Totally. Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is this? Why is I know it's, I don't want to blame the mother. I don't want to blame this guy's wife because this guy sounds like he's abusive. But why is she letting this happen? Do we know anything about her situation?
I do not. And, you know, even if I did, I wouldn't probably feel very comfortable talking about that because, I mean, this guy is the real danger right now. And I just, why isn't this being stopped? You know, why isn't anyone stepping in? And the funny thing too is that pregnant women, they have their bodies so regulated so much, and they're told they can't even have things like, I don't know, coffee or something. That's gonna hurt the baby. And yet,
there's so many things that a pregnant woman isn't supposed to have, and they're constantly being monitored in everything that they're doing and criticized in public and in private, and like it's just so gross to me. And then this is all we're supposed to all let this fly and say nothing.
Well, you know what else women can't have access to whenever they are lactating is a drug called domperidone, that is a drug that increases milk supply, that American women have been clamoring to get access to. They've had breast reduction surgery, if they have endocrine disorders and don't have adequate milk supply, if they desperately want to breastfeed their own children and their milk supply is low. There's been a lockdown on this medication since I started practicing as a midwife in the mid-90s. And because they say there's this very small chance it could cause cardiac irregularity, cardiac rhythm irregularities in babies. For a long time, it was legal for women in Canada, and US women could order it through Canadian pharmacies. But now you can't even get it. If you're female, you can't get it through a Canadian pharmacy. It's illegal for you to have it, and it's considered child endangerment for you and any provider who helps you access it to take it if you are a breastfeeding woman. But it's considered an essential part of transgender medicine to help these men lactate. They have it, they access it, they're given it to induce milk production from their breast tissue.
Can either of you explain what's happening when a man is lactating? You know, what is actually being produced and how is it being produced?
It's possible to induce what's called gynecomastia in men through creating hormone disruption, right? Through creating endocrine disruption. So if men have too many female hormones in their system, they'll grow breast tissue and they'll sometimes lactate. Another thing that can happen is men can have pituitary tumors that secrete what's called prolactin, which is a hormone that makes the breast lactate. When men are lactating, it usually means something's really wrong with their endocrine system. But now we're inducing endocrine disruption with estrogen, progesterone, and this domperidone. And male breast tissue can be kind of programmed through artificial hormones to make secretions that are, essentially could be called human milk. Like men can breastfeed if we want to get down to just the mechanics of it. The issue is they shouldn't, and we should all agree it's wrong for them to do so because it's human experimentation, it's pedophilia, it's robbing infants of the maternal child bond that is supposed to be the basis of the of all human development. There's so many reasons why it's wrong, but you can induce male breasts to lactate.
But they don't have mammary glands.
You can induce
Correct?
mammary glands through hormone disruption. In the same way, I don't know if they, like you can make a woman grow a beard. Like breast development is a secondary sex characteristic. It's not so primary sex characteristics are what we're born with of penis and testes for males and vagina, clitoris, ovaries for females. Like the basic baby male and female template and early childhood male and female template, those are considered your primary sex characteristics. At puberty, we go through these enormous hormone surges that create our secondary sex characteristics. So for females, for both sexes, it's pubic hair and hair under the armpits. For both sexes, it's you get more oily. And then for females, we develop breasts and we start menstruating and, our labia grows. For males, their penis and testes grow. They get a lot of chest hair and a beard. They start growing a beard. So those can be induced artificially. That's pediatric transgender medicine. And that's all of transgender medicine is artificially inducing secondary sex characteristics.
Can we call this lactation, or is it more accurate to say secretion? Helena just asked this and it reminded me I've been saying lactation in quotations, but I don't even know what to call this.
My head's been spinning about it. I kind of feel like we need to go back to these old terms that were our ancestral terms and start reclaiming the term mother's milk, and nothing else is okay,
Yeah.
Though the men are trying to steal that terminology too.
Okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
They're probably making something very similar to milk, and we're soon going to have an onslaught of studies telling us how good it is for babies. The science is being manufactured right now as we speak to support this.
I want to just say to people who are watching on YouTube, if you're in the live chat and you have questions or comments that you want us to address on air, please do that now using the super chat so that I see it and so that we can get to it before we end the stream. But Genevieve, you've done so much work like delving into these men and what they're doing, what their backgrounds are, why they're doing it. What have you discovered about men who are attempting to breastfeed, in quotation, babies?
In my experience and in my opinion, once they've reached that point, it's like extreme fetishism. There's not a path to this particular lactophilia that just starts there. It escalates, and this lactophilia is sort of on the further end of things after you've done this, or whatever. And I'll give you an example of that. Shoop, Jamie Shoop. So does anybody remember Shoop? Like
changing back and forth.
Absolutely.
Oh, right. Okay.
Nuts. Yeah. He's bonkers, right? He's clearly mentally unwell. Like you said, changing back and forth. He said he was non-binary. Then he said he was a trans woman. Then he said he was desisting. Then he said, like 5 times, I think. Mm-hmm. But he had written this blog post on, I think it was on Substack, maybe. He deleted it since, but it was called Autogynephilia, like my journey or something like this. Yeah. And in it, he'd taken pictures of his like fetish equipment, and among them was a breast pump, which I see with a lot of the older men who decide that they're going to transition or, take estrogen, is that they like to fiddle around with a breast pump. They seem to begin using it in order to like help themselves grow, but then it kind of goes from there. There was also the case of, do you remember Nominal Naomi, who he calls himself he calls himself a lactation activist on social media, but he's another one who was sort of coming out in support of men doing this procedure, and then it was discovered that he had been making porn of himself while dressed as a cow. So there's this whole genre of pornography that has to do with equating women with cows.
Oh my God. Sorry. Throwing that down.
And it seems to be popular with these men. And if you like, you could even just do a quick search on Amazon. You'll see transgender erotica is being self-published on Amazon, like I had mentioned before. And this particular genre is really up there. There's like pregnancy erotica, there's, you know, breastfeeding erotica, there's like surrogacy erotica. And it just goes to show that every single aspect of our women's existence and identity can be turned into just a cheap thrill for men, something that they can get off to. And in my opinion, the breastfeeding, the lactophilia fetish, like I said, is on the further side of things after you've done this or that. So these men are porn addicted, often going through an identity crisis, a midlife crisis typically. And yeah, there's that pedophilia, isn't there? Something about age regression involved in that too. To think that you would use an infant in this way for your own sexual pleasure. I mean, my God.
And that people can't see it. Again, even after these men have been telling us who they are, like AGP is out of the closet now, right? Autogynephilia is like getting front page news. People are all accepting, like guys are writing books and Jen Specht is recommending them. And we've got to acknowledge the friendly AGP, you know, and then they can't see that this is pedophilia. It's absolutely pedophilia. And it seems to me like it's the heterosexual AGPs who are interested in this. I have to wonder how these poor experimented upon children are going to proceed with their lives. You know, they don't have the ability to orgasm. They don't have libidos. They don't have normal genitalia. Like, I doubt very much this is going to be a big phenomenon in that group, you know, of the trans kids. They're sort of the shield the AGPs hide behind, right? The trans kids are their shield they hide behind, of like these poor trans kids getting beat up at school. Like they're, you know, how can you be so mean? It doesn't seem like those are the guy though. Like this is more about autogynephilia. These are heterosexual men who want to put babies to their breasts.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that spectrum a little bit, you know, the escalation spectrum, because it seems to me that there is a mixture of things happening with the age regression fetishism, because it's occurred to me that there are men who start to take estrogen because they think it will make them look younger, or that it will somehow help them look like they'll say that it will stop balding, that they want to have girl skin. So there's something already inherently pedophilic about this, right? Because it's like, maybe it's got to do with fear of death, fear of aging, and then they turn into this sexual pathology as an escape from that. But already it's infantilizing women, calling themselves girls, sometimes dressing as though they are much younger than they really are. And when I see that, it just makes a striking parallel between that and, you know, autopedophilia, wherein men start to act and dress like children. I mean, they're showing you what they're sexually turned on by. Just
right.
Yeah, I mean, I was just responding to the attempts to look not like a woman but like a girl, which is what so many of these AGPs do. And if you talk to trans widows, for example, they'll talk about this as well, that when their male partners started down the path with this fetish, and it starts to become something that they want to do, not just in the bedroom, but as a part of their daily life. The kinds of clothes that they start buying and wearing are, like, they're, first of all, like these super ugly, tacky, cheap synthetic things, but they're girl clothes. They're clothes that you would wear if you were a teenager, maybe in your early 20s tops. They're not the clothes that a normal adult woman would wear for the most part. I guess this isn't true of all of them, because I think Debbie Hayton wears pretty normal conservative clothes. But yeah, they talk about the impact of the estrogen on their skin as making their skin softer and younger. I don't know that it's about fear of death so much as this fetishization of girls and young women, and this idea of themselves as being this fuckable, sexual, pornifiable object that turns them on, that maybe will turn men on so that they can be pornified in the way that they're pornifying these girls that they're seeing in pornography, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and didn't Harry Benjamin, when he was researching hormones, I think he had, maybe someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but he had presented this as like a fountain of youth. So already back in history, there was this idea that if you can control hormones, you can control aging, you could maybe reverse aging. So there's this mucky, inextricable bit in there that's got to do with aging and somehow trying to prevent it.
Well, yeah, and it's not like the AGPs are the only ones falling for that. I would say well over 75% of women past menopause in the United States are falling for that. Like that's a huge industry, and we're being told menopause is a disease, that age is a disease. It's hormone deficiency. People are getting, the number of people I know who are going and getting hormone pellets injected in their butts, and that's normalized. Oh, I got the pellet. I'm like, what do you mean you got the pellet? And they got a pellet full of hormones stuck in their glute so they can have estrogen and progesterone and testosterone coming out of this little implant. This is so common. I don't know if this is happening in other countries to the same degree, but in the United States, most women past menopause are taking some kind of hormone replacement therapy to try to be young forever.
Yeah, we were talking about that this weekend. This this idea that you don't really need to go through menopause at all. You can just take hormones and kind of stave it off forever and maintain your youthful libido, and not have to suffer through the changes that come with menopause. And I don't know a ton about these hormones. I've been trying to look into it recently, but of course, to me, just in and of itself, very simply, like, I don't want to be reliant on hormones for the rest of my life. And so I think if you start on these things, you just have to continue taking them forever. And I think that there's an increase of risk of cancer that comes along with it. And I don't know what else, but yeah, this obsession with staying young is weird. I mean, we see, I don't know if you guys have seen all these biohacker influencers that really kind of weird me out too, who are putting themselves through all sorts of experimentation and really trying to sort of perfect their bodies to the extent where they claim they won't age. And they don't look great. They don't look any better than anyone else. These guys, to me, look the age that they are, if not older, and they sort of somehow have like waxy faces. And I don't know if that's because of the hormones that they're taking or because they're also, doing Botox injections at the same time. But this fear of aging is really anti-human, just like all of this stuff is. Like we don't want to be going through human processes, and we want to pretend that we don't have to, and that we can outsource everything to technology and really no longer be human at all.
Right. So there's a question in the comments I wanted to address. It says, Trouble Child says, don't some women with HIV breastfeed as long as there's low viral load? Is pointing to the AGP's HIV status, therefore stigmatizing HIV positive women who choose to breastfeed? Okay, I think that there's a lot of like weaponized language that we've all been taught to use, where, including the word stigmatizing. But I think there's a big difference between trying to support a woman who wants to breastfeed and have this innate natural birthright experience with her child versus critiquing a man intentionally exposing his child to a deadly virus. I think that we need to separate that out. Does that make sense? And yes, a woman who is breastfeeding her child, the evidence shows that if she's HIV positive and her viral load is low, that there are natural protective factors within the breast milk that if she breastfeeds exclusively, it's very unlikely the baby will get HIV. It's a really tricky territory supporting her in breastfeeding. There's no reason for a man to breastfeed ever. And there especially, it should be criminal at any point because it's pedophilia, and it should be extra criminal if he's willingly risking giving his child a deadly disease through doing it.
Yeah, it just shouldn't be happening, period. There's, like you say, there's just no need for it at all. It doesn't offer the baby anything, and it could be harmful to the baby, and it's really just about his own validation and the validation of his fetish. And I cannot believe that this is going on, and that these medical organizations, these doctors are advocating it and saying it's fine. I mean, how do you live with yourself as a doctor to say that, male so-called lactation is just the same as mother's milk, as a mother breastfeeding her baby, that not only that it's not harmful, but it's just the same. It offers, the same nutrients. It's, there's no difference.
Yeah, you just reminded me of something, again, about that article about the HIV positive man, which is that he seemed to be pretty excited about the idea of being in medical literature, as if this was like something really exciting, because it's like, ooh, that, there's a bit of fame to that, right? And I feel like in the cases of some of these academics and researchers, there's that element there too. I get to break new ground. I get to do something that other people aren't doing and make a name for myself. So just ego,
It's absolutely narcissistic. It's ego gratification too. Boundary breaking fetish. I think it's so interesting that the contrast of we see this messaging. I've heard it from many men that Genevieve and Anna are mean by their website that points out that these men are pedophiles and that they have fetishes, and that this is about them and acting out their kink on the rest of society and harming individuals in the process as well. That's mean. That's mean to do the work you do, is what I've been told before. Like how mean of her to just point to these cases. But then when Debbie Hayton and Phil, what was his last name? The AGP at Phil Illey, was that his name? Phil Illey. When these men, it's like they're brave to stand up and admit that this is a fetish and this is the kink, and because of that, we should call them she, because they admitted it, and isn't that great? That cognitive dissonance is it's enough to just break my brain in half. I'm so upset about it.
I mean, I don't see it as like
I'm not mean. I'm not mean.
I'm kind of mean. I just feel like it doesn't matter if it's mean or polite. I mean, that's not the issue. The reason that I refer to men as he is just because it's the truth, and I don't see why. And in some ways, why, especially if a man who knows that he's a man but prefers to dress as a woman or take hormones or to have breast implants or whatever, why he would need to be referred to as she, because it wouldn't be rude or insulting. If this guy knows he's a guy, then why would he be insulted if somebody called him he? Then really what's the issue? I mean, this drives me insane, because there's people like Katie Herzog and Jesse Singal, both of whom I really like as people, but who, again, I listened to Blocked and Reported recently, and Helen Lewis and Katie Herzog were talking about this whole controversy and talking about this issue of pronouns, preferred pronouns. And, you know, Katie doesn't see it as an issue at all. And she thinks that we're all being ridiculous, like not just mean, but I think she thinks that it's not important, right? Like there's other more important issues at hand with regard to the trans trend, particularly around kids and transing kids. And so why not just be polite and use preferred pronouns unless it's a rapist, for example, in which case she does feel more inclined to use he. But I mean, to me, like, it's like, this is the whole slippery slope, because this is just what it started as. Just be polite. And that's how we ended up here. Just be polite, you know, just let them be. They're not doing anything to you. And then all of a sudden it becomes mandatory that you have to refer to men as she. And if you don't, you're guilty of some kind of hate crime or hate speech. And now here we are where we're pretending that there's no difference between a woman breastfeeding her baby and a man lactating and forcing the baby to pretend that, you know, this is breast milk.
Mm-hmm.
And do people think that children exist in some kind of bubble that's outside of society? Because if you're going to start calling a man a woman, children are going to pick up on that, you know? And in the past, with some of these transvestite lobbying groups, that I've talked about before, they would do a similar thing. You know, they would dress up in public. They would get their wives and their family, their children, even, to sometimes use their woman name, their fetish name. So it is conditioning, you know, and it impacts children. How are you going to say, like, it's not okay to medically transition a child, but it's okay to lie about someone's sex? Well, the kids are going to get the message, and then they're going to say, well, what's going on here? Like, is sex real or is it not? What you're sending two completely different messages.
Right. And this movement has been very adamant about its need to access our children. And it's, you know, that this movement to normalize transgenderism has brought us Drag Queen Story Hour, has brought us, you know, the book Gender Queer in our elementary schools. It's brought us pronouns in kindergarten. I was talking to a friend recently whose 5-year-old was doing an art class at the museum here in Albuquerque, and she picked up her kid and said, how was it? And she said, well, at the beginning something weird happened. And she's like, okay, tell me more, I'm interested. And she said, they went around in a circle and they asked us our noun, and I didn't know what they meant. They said we had to say our noun. So I thought, a noun is a person, place, or thing. So I said person. But the kid was describing a pronoun circle with 5-year-olds in an art class at the public museum in Albuquerque. Like, they are pushing this on children. This is, I don't know how, you're right. Like, how can people, like well-meaning people, I believe they're well-meaning, like Jesse and Katie, critique, you know, mastectomies for 12-year-olds, but not critique, like, really brainwashing our children into this ideology to begin with.
Well, and how do you talk about the problem with men breastfeeding children if you're not going to say that they're men?
Right, exactly.
Like, if you're going to pretend that a man can be a woman just to be polite and refer to him as a woman, then things are going to get very confusing, and things have gotten very confusing. And I was reading the website of this Children of Transitioners group that first challenged the NHS on this policy. I was just reading the story a bit of the founder, who this is not her real name. I think she goes by Emma B or something like that. And she was talking about how these transsexuals would use her as a prop to pass, basically. So her father and then his transsexual friends who would come over or be around, or, you know, who he was dating or whatever, would kind of take her out with them to go out in public to sort of avoid being called out as being men, to avoid, you know, getting comments or looks or whatever, but maybe in their brains to sort of convince those around them that they actually were women. Because see, a child is around me. I'm not a pervert. I'm totally normal and fine, just like any other lady.
Oh, it all feels like the end of the world.
Yeah, it does a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, it's I go back and forth because it's like, okay, there's pushback. We're now talking about AGPs. People are getting mad about the transitioning of kids and about kids being indoctrinated into gender identity ideology. People are comfortable now on the internet saying, no, that's a man, whereas before that was practically illegal. You'd get kicked off of whatever platform you were on. But it's tough because I think like we're making progress in the trans kid realm, but we're making progress in this weird way wherein you still have to kind of be polite and you can't say that they're perverts, and it's better to refer to these guys as she because we're trying to get some important work done, and I'm not quite sure what to think about that.
I often feel, especially recently, I often feel that saying no to something that gets men off is one of the greatest sins.
Well, look at what happens when you criticize
Commit.
porn. I mean, I'm sure you all have experienced this just as much as I have. Like, people freak out. Like, oh God, I criticized porn. Have you seen porn? Porn is like one of the worst things in the entire world. Like,
it's racist, it's abusive, it's all of these things that exist in porn that if you took it out of the porn and put it in a movie, the racism even, for example, people would be appalled, and yet it's okay. Yeah, so I think that the male sexual right is held up above all and cannot be violated. And I just feel like this normalizing of the lactophilia is another extension of that. And as usual, women are called mean just for saying no. It's not like we're calling for extreme actions. We're just saying no. Just no.
It's wrong.
I mean, yeah, and you can see that again when you criticize prostitution, because you get, oh, these poor men. Well, what are they going to do then? What are these poor, lonely men who don't have access to women? What are they going to do if you take away prostitutes? Like, gasp, you are so cruel and mean and not empathetic to the plight of these men. And it's not, like, I am on some levels empathetic to the plight of some of these men. Like, I think Johns are disgusting. I think that buying sex is disgusting, but I actually do also feel bad and sympathetic for men who are lonely or like socially awkward or feel like they can't meet women or feel like they want intimacy and can't get it. Like I know I've interviewed men who have paid for sex and since stopped and explained why. And, in some cases they, were just really terrible people who had to do a lot of work. And in some case, they've been fed this idea that, first of all, it's fine. And that second of all, it's maybe even helpful to these women because they could use the money and, it's just their job and they like their job and whatever. But I mean, like, it's not even that I'm lacking empathy, but it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to put this guy's feelings, whoever he is, in front of somebody being abused and raped and exploited. And it's just like, all this is saying is that I agree with you, Genevieve. I think you're right, which is that to criticize any form of male sexual desire, male sexuality, what men do to cater to their sexual desires or fetishes or whatever, that seems to be the worst thing that you could possibly do in the world. Because where have we been the most attacked over anything? Criticizing pornography, criticizing prostitution, criticizing transgenderism.
Right. I do think we're going to see a lot more of this. I've been watching the normalization of, yes, lactophilia. Thank you for bringing that word to my vocabulary, Genevieve. I'm really grateful to finally be able to name it, and I thank you for that. I've been watching this. Back in in 2015, when I was watching the shift to the term human milk feeding, was seeing this coming, thinking about all the transhumanism and the AGP's breastfeeding. I even joked. I'm going to try to find it. I had a big Facebook post of how I was going to rewrite the old La Leche League classic, "The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding," and call it "The Personally Art of Human Milk Feeding." Like, this has been going on a long time. But we're going to see more
Aren't
of it.
they
There
taking
is
Weatherly out anyway of that title?
La Leche's like gone. It's a disaster. Like they don't know what to do. There is no, the grassroots has to grow up again. Like the old institutions are captured. They're worse than useless. They're weaponized against women. So we can no longer look to what, to my generation, were these bastions of protection and safety and female nurturing and wisdom and a reclamation of our birthright as women. We can't look to them anymore. They've been captured. They're still selling that to women, but they're actually providing, like, the product they're actually giving to women is brainwashing and disempowerment and all of this craziness. It's gone. So hopefully something else will rise up.
The betrayal is just insane.
Oh, it's awful. It's a war, but we will be seeing more and more of this. It's coming. It's here. Like the literature is being changed. And I think it's so important to see like how GenSpect responded to this. Their first response to this was, we don't have any evidence it's safe. And then there was this enormous comment onslaught against them of, that's not the issue here. But that's most people in the Western world's first inclination of, we don't have evidence it's safe. And people worship science. They worship technology. They worship the institutions that produce this science. We are going to see an onslaught of manufactured evidence that this is safe and good for babies. And we have to keep coming back to, this is wrong. It's pedophilia. It's sex crimes against infants. It's an abomination. I don't care what the manufactured, captured institutions say.
Well, do you have anything else to add, Genevieve?
I did want to say one thing maybe, but this is pretty terrible. So I wondered if it's a good note to end on or not. But when I was reading the stories in the Eunuch Archive, which I wrote about for Reduxx, there was one story there in particular that stuck in my head. I mean, they all kind of do, but it had to do with milk. And it was this fiction story that imagined a world where, children were disconnected from mothers and men could buy babies and men could get breast milk, like all on demand. And in this story, the men were putting estrogen in the breast milk to feminize little boys and then to sell them in the sex industry to traffic them.
Oh, God.
And there's an element of that awful degree of fetishism within just the hormone use itself. But to think that when a man is putting a child on his nipple like this, that there might be something like that going on in his mind is absolutely terrifying. We also see how hormones are being used by brothels in India. So they'll traffic underage girls and provide them with estrogen to make their breasts grow, to make them look older than they are. And I'm not really good at ending on a positive note, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm just so appalled with the way things are going. They didn't do anything to protect women when they came for us, and now who's going to stand up for the children?
Right. I mean, that's disgusting, first of all. But I mean, the sex industry is just growing. Porn is just, the porn industry is just growing. Things are getting worse and worse in that arena. We're full on into transhumanism. And I think that it's worth noting that the reason that nobody stood by us and spoke up and got up in arms about transgenderism when feminists were first trying to bring this all to light and fight back and push back was, I think, because we were just talking about women at the time. I didn't anticipate that this would happen to kids. I think maybe some other women did. But I didn't think about the trans kid end of things because I was just talking about protecting women only spaces and my concerns about the nullification of women's rights, and of course about the inherent sexism and misogyny of this ideology. But I didn't realize even how far this was going to go. But no one gave a shit then, and they can sort of pretend like, oh, people didn't know about it. And it was true that there was silence in the media and that we didn't have really very many avenues at all about getting the word out because we just had our own, blogs and platforms and forums and whatever, which most people in the world are not paying attention to. So fair enough. But, what really got people up in arms was gender identity ideology in school and the transitioning of kids, which is great because that's horrific and disgusting. But yeah, I guess I just feel like people shouldn't be pretending that they didn't get on board and push back until, essentially it's too late. We're working backwards now and we're in a really horrific place as a society. And so many kids have already been trans and their lives and bodies are destroyed. And we could have stopped this decades ago and we didn't because it was just women talking about women things. And to talk about, transgenderism as a fetish sounded crazy to people because I think Sheila Jeffries talked about that some years ago.
It's mean.
Yeah, exactly.
You shouldn't criticize, what people do in the privacy of their own homes. It didn't stay there. Also, in their homes, they had women and children. So
right.
Yeah. And in their homes, they watched pornography where women were being abused and exploited. And those are real live women.
Those are real life women.
So, yeah, not a great note to end on, but I'm really glad that we talked about this because it's disgusting and wrong and it has to be stopped. And so I appreciate you joining us today, Genevieve. For those watching, Genevieve writes for Reduxx, which is at www, I know I don't need to say that, reduxx.info. And she's on Twitter at Women Read Women. Is that your primary Twitter account or do you use a different one mostly?
It is. I had set up another one with my name on it like a while back out of fear of getting banned. So that one I don't really use. So yeah. Okay.
And everyone follow and support Reduxx. And Mary Lou is on Substack at Mary Lou Singleton and on Twitter at ML_Singleton. And her website is enchantedfamilymedicine.com. And don't drink the male lactation or the Kool-Aid. I was thinking about that throughout that this t-shirt that I wear every week was especially relevant to this conversation. Don't drink the Kool-Aid at all. This is bullshit. You guys can buy this shirt if you want to. It's if you click on the shop tab at meganmurphy.ca. And I also just made a sticker over there that says, "Your mom's a TERF," which she is because she knows what a woman is. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We're here every Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Like and subscribe to support the channel. I've been putting the audio up just raw and unedited on meganmurphy.ca, which is my Substack, under the Where Are All the Women tab, because some people were just interested in having access to audio only. I am probably forgetting to say things. Do either of you want to add anything? What are you two working on right now? Anything you want to plug here?
I'm always working on something, but just,
yeah,
more perverts. So
more pervert stuff.
I will just say, so we really rely on donations from readers. That's our primary way of paying writers. So just want to say thank you to the people who already contribute, and we are aware of your contributions and very much appreciate it. So
great. Well, I want to say, if you've been reading Genevieve's amazing work and listening to this conversation, and you're feeling depressed and anxious and like it's the end of the world, I do on my website have a great herb class called Herbs for Psychospiritual Well-Being. If you'd like some help from the plant world of staying centered and calm and maybe even happy in these crazy times, you can check it out on my website, enchantedfamilymedicine.com.
I'm glad that you added that. And yeah, again, I was really excited about what we learned in the herbalism / plant medicine workshop this weekend. I mean, there's so much that the earth offers, and we've been taught to rely on big pharma, and we definitely should not be relying on and trusting big pharma. And so, yeah, I think getting in touch with nature and our natures is more important than ever right now, as they're trying to separate us from ourselves and from each other. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope to see you next week.